Chris Sale looked good in the spring training opener. Ian Anderson, not so much. Let's talk about it. Yes, welcome on in to Braves Today for Monday, February 24th. Your source of news, notes, and updates on your Atlanta Braves. I'm your host, Lindsay Crosby. You can follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Crosby Baseball. You can follow the show on Twitter, Braves_today. We have a Facebook page and Instagram as well. And you can find all of my written work, bravestoday.com. That's the Braves Today Substack, as this is both a podcast and a newsletter. Another huge week of content going to be coming from the Substack. Now is the time to jump in there. Free or paid memberships are great. Also, make sure, even if you're listening on audio, that you go out and subscribe to the Braves Today YouTube channel. We post video usually in the evenings of that day's press conferences and media availabilities. We posted from last night, Ian Anderson and Bryan talking about Sunday's spring training matchup at home in Cool Today Park against the Tampa Bay Rays. And we're going to get to Ian Anderson. I want to talk about him. I want to talk about the outfielders. I want to talk about Bryce Elder and Dodd as well. But first, we have to discuss Chris Sale. Chris Sale made his debut in spring training on Saturday on the road versus the Twins. Took 21 pitches to get through 2 perfect innings. No hits, no walks allowed. Also, no strikeouts. And we talked last week, right? We talked on Thursday about what actually matters from spring training and what doesn't. So the general trend of Chris Sale is he pitched, he looked healthy, his velo looked good, everything appears to be fine. But I think a bigger deal are some of the comments that he gave to the media after the start. Just simply about how the Braves are handling things for him. Maybe a little bit differently than they might have done last spring. And the big thing here is Chris Sale is holding back a little bit, right? We talked about this on Thursday. These guys aren't going full bore in the very first start of spring. 93.8 miles an hour was the average for Sale from Saturday's start. His average last year was 94.9. He didn't even throw a fastball that hard in the entire matchup. But this is something where completely to be expected, right? This is where Chris Sale expected to be and plans to be for the majority of spring. We don't actually have video from the road trip. We have some of the quotes from David O'Brien of The Athletic. He's the one who transcribed some of that interview for us. And Sale said that the game went well. He felt good coming out of it, and that's really what matters. Quote, mechanically, I feel like I'm in a good spot. I feel like I was throwing all of my pitches for strikes and was able to locate in situations where I really wanted to. He did confirm that he's not, while he is a competitor, right? He doesn't want to be bad. This goes back to that anecdote I had of him last spring. He did admit that he is holding back a little bit right now. Quote, I think we are trying to limit that. I guess you could say save your bullets a little bit, but just really working on the things I really want to work on. Command, location, delivery, arm action, that kind of stuff right now. End quote. And when he's talking about being effective and being good in spring training starts, he acknowledged he's a competitor, but it's really answering your own questions. I would liken this to a college baseball team from the SEC. I'm going to use Auburn because I've talked to a lot of their coaches and players in the last couple of weeks for a podcast that I do on a freelance basis. How they talk about the first couple weekends of the year. They faced Holy Cross, they faced Wright State. Not a lot of scouting you can do early in the year on a lower conference opponent like a Holy Cross or a Wright State. And so what they're really trying to do is make sure that their approaches are sound, their pitching plans are good, and they're doing everything they can control to be a good baseball team. And Chris Sale had a similar comment to that. Quote, I'm competitive. I obviously want to go out there and do well, but where we're at right now, it's more, okay, how's the delivery syncing up? How's the arm action? And just pitch quality, really. Catcher calls an inside fastball. Am I leaving it high and wide? Am I kind of casting breaking balls? I'm just trying to narrow everything down. The common assumption on Chris Sale is that he's going to take a step back from last season's Cy Young. 18-3, 238 ERA in 29 starts, 225 strikeouts and 177 and 2/3 innings. I understand why the common belief is that Sale's going to step back a little bit, because most players do after a Cy Young season. But I do think the fact that Atlanta wants to continue giving extra rest to the starters is going to do a lot for Chris Sale. They talked about this. I don't have the exact quote from Anthopoulos. I want to say it was in some of the winter meeting stuff is when he mentioned it. But they intend to give extra rest to the starters again this year like they did last year. I'll remind you, for Chris Sale, he in his 29 starts last year, 7 of them came on regular 4 days rest. 14 of them were on 5 days rest. 6 of them were on 6 days rest. He had another start on 10 days rest. And then there's the official start to open the season, which I don't have the exact count of rest on that because I don't remember his last start in spring. But Baseball Reference just calls that first start 99 days rest because it goes back to your last official outing. But Sale, most of his starts were on additional rest, and most of his starts on a regular schedule didn't come until the summer. He made a start in July. It was like the 9th. He turned around the 14th and made a start. They were both shorter starts, 5 1/3 and then 5 innings. Then they had the All-Star break and all of that. He came out of the All-Star break, and it was like August 7th. He went 4 2/3 against the Brewers, turned around, made a start again on the 12th, 7 scoreless innings. Went on the 17th, so 4 days and then a start on the 17th, and then had extra rest on the 23rd, regular rest on the 28th. It was a lot of stuff down the stretch. Like most of those were down the stretch where he started on regular rest. Until obviously his final start of the year was September 19th in Cincinnati. That's the last one he ended up making of the year because he missed that final week and then the wild card round. But I feel really good about where Sale is at this point in spring, about him being able to get into the season healthy, and that combined with Atlanta's plan of keeping him on additional rest, keeping Lopez on additional rest, keeping Schwellenbach and everybody else on additional rest. You have to think about it. Everybody's going to have workload questions, right? Grant Holmes moving to the rotation for the first time. He's going to have workload questions because last year he threw, 90 innings, 80 innings, something like that, when you count the minors. Ian Anderson's going to have workload questions because he's coming off of Tommy John. He made starts in the minors last year. It wasn't a full season. He admitted to being gassed at the end of the year. Again, we're going to get to Ian Anderson a little bit later, right? It was something where he had 15 starts in the minors, and his last 4, the walks were up, the strikeouts were down, the ERA and OPS was up because he was just running out of steam at the end of the year. Again, we're going to get to Ian Anderson in just a minute. So I feel good about Atlanta's plan, and Sale obviously looks like he had a full healthy offseason. He is completely healthy. It's hard to see, barring an injury, a significant step back from what he did last season. Special shout out, I want to give him credit because I feel like he doesn't always get it. Bryce Elder. He came out after Sale on that Saturday game. He gave Atlanta 2 scoreless innings, 1 hit allowed, 2 strikeouts. And because we have StatCast data on the road there in Fort Myers, his fastball velocity was some of the best fastball velocity of his career. In 2023, his sinker averaged 89.5. His four-seamer averaged 90.8. In 2024, a lost season for Bryce Elder, his sinker was 90.2 miles an hour. His four-seamer was 91.5. In this Saturday start, the sinker averaged 92.3. He didn't throw any four-seamers. He did throw some cutters, which is a new development and not a pitch that he had previously flashed in the majors before. I don't think it's a misclassification of the slider because he also threw sliders. There is a distinct difference in the velocity, in the spin rate, and all of that between the slider and the cutter. I legitimately think these are two different pitches. Is that something where he's cutting the four-seam fastball and it now reads as a cutter? Is that something where he just didn't throw the four-seam, but he plans to roll out three separate fastballs plus a slider and a changeup this year? I don't know. But his fastball velocity, he touched 93.9 on the sinker. I haven't pulled the full info in StatCast. That may be the hardest sinker of his career. Adding a tick or two of velo combined with some better locations. He lost some drop on the slider last year, which meant it hung a lot more. All that stuff adding up, and you may see a more effective Bryce Elder for however much you do see him this year. It's virtually a guarantee he will make starts for Atlanta. We don't know when, we don't know how many, but it's virtually a guarantee that he will make starts, and he had the best results, really, with the two strikeouts. He had arguably some of the best results of anybody that pitched in that game for Atlanta. I think he was the only guy who had multiple strikeouts and didn't allow a run. Let's go there. In just a minute, not everything was perfect for everybody. Let's talk about the struggles of Ian Anderson and Dylan Dodd. We'll do that next, right here on Braves Today. Second segment of Braves Today here on Monday, February 24th. We're talking about some of the spring games over the weekend. We're talking about Braves versus Twins on Saturday. We're talking about Braves versus Rays at home on Sunday. Sticking with Saturday, since I still have that one up, let's talk about Dylan Dodd. He took the loss in that matchup, and it was really, full disclosure, I did not see the game. It was not televised, right? I have the radio description, listening to Ben Ingram, the great Ben Ingram. I have the StatCast data, but he 17 pitches to get through his inning. He allowed 3 hits, 2 runs, officially was charged with both a loss and a blown save. So that's fun to see a guy get double tagged like that. And I'm trying to figure out Dylan Dodd here, right? He had a lot of struggles last season. I'll remind you, in 2023, he had a start the first week of the season because he had an ERA of 2 in spring training. And after that first start, he got blown up in the second one, made 7 starts, but ended up getting sent down. Last year, only made it up for 1 relief appearance, gave up 2 runs in 2 innings. And I'm not really sure what happened in this Saturday outing for Dylan Dodd. Last time we saw him in the majors in both 23 and 24, he was throwing 4-seamer, slider, cutter, changeup. That was his 4-pitch mix. Right, the cutter was the 3rd or 4th pitch, depending on the season. It was his 4th pitch in 23. It was his 3rd pitch in 24. Again, this is a very small sample. He didn't throw any sliders. His primary pitch in that inning was his cutter, right? Averaged 84.6. 4-seam fastball averaged 93, which is right there with what he did in that inning of relief for Atlanta last year, so he's amped up. Changeup was right there, the same velocity. I don't know if he didn't throw any sliders because he's not going to throw it anymore. I don't know if the situation didn't dictate it. He wasn't comfortable with it. Whatever, right? Really short outing. Again, 17 pitches. Hard to draw too many conclusions from that. We do have his quotes, though. He also talked to David O'Brien of The Athletic, and he acknowledged that he's not been good enough. Quote, "I think it comes down to my performance and how I'm doing. I've been given plenty of chances in the past 2 years and just haven't lived up to the expectations or the performance I hold myself to." The performance standards, what he's talking about there. And I think whenever I start out, if it's AAA, I think it's just a matter of whether I can be more consistent. I've shown flashes, shown that I can get guys out, but as long as I can show consistency, I know opportunities are going to come, whether it's early in spring or later in the season. I feel like the Braves don't want to give up on Dylan Dodd yet, but I'm worried now that Alan Winans was DFA'd. I'm worried Dylan Dodd and some of these random relievers are all the guys on the short list to be DFA'd if the Braves either require somebody else or need to add an NRI to the 40-man roster before the season opener. So Buck Farmer, you have to add Buck Farmer to your 26-man roster. Somebody's going to have to get DFA'd off the 40-man roster to make a spot. I'm worried Dylan Dodd might be one of those options. Okay, he needs to have a good spring to show the organization that he's got okay velo for a lefty. He's hitting 94 on his fastball. Not many, the average left-handed pitcher velocity on a four-seam fastball in MLB last year was 93.3. So he's got above average velo for a lefty. He's just got to, one, bring that slider back out, and then figure out what he's doing with, the four-seam slider, cutter change. He's got to be more consistent, to his point, and show that he can get guys out. Ian Anderson also threw a slider on Sunday. We don't have StatCast info for this. All we have is what I saw on television and what he talked to the media about, which, by the way, we played that press conference, or we uploaded that press conference on the channel on Sunday night, on the YouTube channel, if you want to go watch it. But the issue on Sunday wasn't the slider, right? Like he last time he was up in the majors, he threw 2,188 pitches. 22 of them were sliders. So he has thrown it before. That was 2021. He didn't throw it any in 2022 in the majors that I saw. And then obviously he was out injured for 23 and for 24. I feel like it's a useful addition, right? I like bringing the slider back. The issue he had was his changeup. He bounced a couple of the changeups. He did allow 3 walks in his 2 innings, and really it was the second inning that got away from him. And some of that was, I feel like the velocity not quite being there, the full max effort, means the changeup wasn't landing like he thought it was. It's so much of a feel pitch. You have to feel the changeup. And if you're throwing everything, I'm going to say 90%, 95%, he acknowledged he usually adds 1 or 2 mile an hour before spring ends. But right now, he's throwing softer. And he's throwing 91 or so, 91, 92. I think he touched 93 maybe. It's normal for him at this point in spring training, but it's lower than where he was when he was up in the regular season. And I feel like that was a little bit of the issue with his changeup, that there just wasn't as much behind them as he was expecting, so they didn't go as far as he thought they would, and they bounced before they got to the plate, right? It was a 59-foot changeup, not a 60 feet 6-inch changeup. But I like the addition of the slider. Now, it's very much in the words of Saris of The Athletic, who talked about this relation to Grant Holmes, it's a boring ass slider, right? It's not anything fancy. It's not a sweeper. It's not something crazy. It's just a normal, regular slider. It's a very high arm angle on Ian Anderson. So it's hard to get the east to west movement out of a very high arm angle. Now having fastball, changeup, curveball, slider, I like having that fourth pitch. I think it's just going to come down to when he finally flips that switch for spring being a little bit more consistent. He said personally that he specifically wanted to add the slider. Quote, I have confidence in it and I like throwing it. But I'm just chalking this one up to nerves. He admitted it in that press conference. This is the first time he's faced major league hitters in a couple years, right? I'm glad he got this one out from underneath him. I'm looking for much bigger things from Ian Anderson. He'd be on track to start probably Saturday. I don't quite know the exact schedule in the rotation. You got to work guys in. But he's probably going to be either in a relief capacity or a starter sometime around Friday or Saturday would be the next time he's out there. Just because he didn't look great in this outing doesn't mean the book is closed on Ian Anderson. I still think he is the favorite to earn one of those final 2 rotation spots, simply because of what he's done in the majors in the past and the fact he's out of options. But again, it is not over. He is not done. There is still plenty of time. He probably has 3 or 4 more starts to get everything underneath him so that he can be a guy for the Braves this season. In just a minute, a lot of the outfielders really did a lot of great work this weekend. We'll talk about that next, right here on Braves Today. Final segment of Braves Today, Lindsay Crosby talking about the spring training games over the weekend for the Atlanta Braves. They dropped both of them to the Twins and to the Rays. Again, nobody cares about the final score in these games, but it's all about our observations. And one of the things we talked about last week was AA discussing Eli White's going to be used in the infield. He's out of options. He was an infielder at Clemson. He played a little bit of infield with the then Oakland A's in their minor leagues when he first was drafted into professional baseball. And he got a couple innings at second base for Atlanta last year. He on Sunday, he started at second base and led off. He went 1 for 1 with a walk, but he made a very good defensive play in the hole at second base. A slow roller between first and second. He ranged out, got it, popped up, and turned and made the throw to second to get the lead runner. Atlanta tried to turn 2. Obviously, couldn't get double play done. I believe it was Orlando Arcia still in the game at that time. Couldn't get the double play finished. Not surprised. It was a slow hit ball, but he got the lead runner, which was a big deal. It was a really good defensive play. The write-up of those 2 games that I posted to the Substack on Monday morning has a video of that play, and it's also circulating around Twitter a little bit, so you can go see it. And that, like, just seeing how good he did, and Snit actually talked about it. Snit talked about it afterwards, discussing how well he did. Snit said, quote, "I just like the fact that he didn't panic and he completed the play." And Snit said that he's going to get him some time on the left side of the infield as well. I don't know if that means shortstop or just third base. But Snit said, quote, "I know during our infield drills, turning double plays, he looks pretty good." That, based on the fact that all of the reports that we've gotten and the very, very limited playtime of some of these outfielders in camp, makes me think there's a legitimate possibility that Eli White could replace Luke Williams on the roster as the utility guy, right? I had the bench as one of your backup catchers. Could be Kurt Casale, could be Chadwick Tromp, could be Sandy Leon, who hit the first home run for the Braves in spring on Sunday. I had Eli White as the backup outfielder. I had Nick Allen as the backup infielder. And I had Luke Williams as the utility guy. But if Eli White shows defensively he can stick in the infield as well, I don't think anybody expects him to be a starter, but can he be respectable if he has to step in at shortstop or third or whatever? If he can do that, and he gets Luke Williams a spot, one, Williams probably, he didn't have any options left. You probably have to DFA him right there. He may get claimed by somebody else. Atlanta's DFA'd him before and him not be claimed. But if you do, that gives you the ability to potentially have Bryan De La Cruz on the roster as another outfielder, which means you can platoon him and Jared Kelenic. The only the three extra base hits over the weekend. Jared Kelenic led off on Saturday and hit a double. Sandy Leon had that home run I already mentioned, and Bryan De La Cruz had a double on Sunday. And given that Kelenic's a lefty, De La Cruz is a righty, that they do have platoon splits, I do feel like if Eli White can stick in the infield, you're then in a situation where he can take the Luke Williams roster spot and Bryan De La Cruz can make the roster. And then you have the option, if Jared Kelenic still shows some weakness against, like in certain platoon situations, you can bring out Bryan De La Cruz as the other half of the platoon. You still have defensive replacements if you feel like you need to replace Profar or Bryan De La Cruz late. You can put Kelenic in their spot, or you can put Eli White in their spot. but you have the ability to carry an extra hitter and platoon guys. That'll be the one platoon spot on the whole roster if Eli White can stick in the infield. So just like I've said, the most important prospect for the Braves is Nacho Alvarez this year, because you need to find out, can he stick at shortstop or not? I feel like the most important backup for the Braves is Eli White. Because Eli White being able to cover shortstop if you need it, or second base, or third base, gives you the ability to carry Bryan De La Cruz and be better in those platoon situations than maybe you would have been when Jared Kelenic was the everyday starter. Now, obviously, you're going to have to make a move when Ronald Acuna Jr. comes back. If everybody's still healthy, which we knock on wood, that's not a guarantee, you would then need to option either Bryan De La Cruz or Jared Kelenic down to AAA. The assumption would be that it would be Bryan De La Cruz going down. Kelenic has much more defensive value than De La Cruz does. He has played some in the outfield. He has played some in center field, but he's really a corner outfielder. He's not graded out amazingly on defense, so it would be tough if your only two bench outfielders were De La Cruz and Eli White. But that's all contingent on how they perform, right? And nobody being injured. That's a problem for May 2nd when Ronald comes back to take on the Dodgers in Truist Park for the weekend. If you were able to listen and or watch these games, I want to hear from you. What stood out to you? What did you think? What surprising depth guy am I not talking about? Were you impressed with Eddie Alvarez playing second and third? Did you find it interesting that Nacho Alvarez played third and not short? Did you think that Connor Capel deserves more attention? Because I believe he actually may have had a hit in both games. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. I think he may have had a hit and scored a run in both games. He's 2 for 3 with 2 runs so far in his Braves spring training career. So I want to hear from you. I'm on Twitter at Crosby Baseball. You can email us, contact@bravestoday.com. You can go leave a comment on the Substack. Again, if you're not subscribed to that, free or paid, either way helps us out a ton, so go do that. But in the meantime, this has been Braves Today.